Hello and welcome to RichieNicks. Today we are celebrating Tolkien Reading Day. What is Tolkien Reading Day? Well, March 25th is the date on which the ring was destroyed. And to commemorate that, and as a way to celebrate the life and work of J.R.R. Tolkien, we read and share readings of his works. I have read Bilbo's introduction to the ring and Riddles in the Dark with Gollum, and now I'm going to read What Happened on March 25th, the year 3019 of the Third Age. This is from The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. Book 6, Chapter 3, Mount Doom. Then he bowed his head and struggled off along the climbing road. It was not as easy a way to take as it had looked at first. By fortune, the fires that had poured forth in the great turmoils when Sam stood upon Cirith Ungol had flowed down mainly on the southern and western slopes, and the road on this side was not blocked. Yet in many places it had crumbled away or was crossed by gaping rents. After climbing eastward for some time, it bent back upon itself at a sharp angle and went westward for a space. There at the bend it was cut deep through a crag of old weathered stone once long ago vomited from the mountain's furnaces. Panting under his load, Sam turned the bend, and even as he did so, out of the corner of his eye, he had a glimpse of something falling from the crag, like a small piece of black stone that had toppled off as he passed. A sudden weight smote him, and he crashed forward, tearing the backs of his hands that still clasped his master's. Then he knew what had happened, for above him as he lay he heard a hated voice.
"Wicked master,"
it hissed.
"Wicked master cheats us, cheats Smeagol, Gollum. He mustn't go that way, he mustn't hurt Precious. Give it to Smeagol, yes, give it to us, give it to us."
With a violent heave, Sam rose up. At once he drew his sword, but he could do nothing. Gollum and Frodo were locked together. Gollum was tearing at his master, trying to get at the chain and the ring. This was probably the only thing that could have roused the dying embers of Frodo's heart and will and attempt to wrest his treasure from him by force. He fought back with a sudden fury that amazed Sam and Gollum also. Even so, things might have gone far otherwise if Gollum himself had remained unchanged, but whatever dreadful paths, lonely and hungry and waterless, he had trodden, driven by a devouring desire and a terrible fear, they had left grievous marks on him. He was a lean, starved, haggard thing, all bones and tight-drawn sallow skin. A wild light flamed in his eyes, but his malice was no longer matched by his old griping strength. Frodo flung him off and rose up, quivering. "Down! Down!" he gasped, clutching his hand at his breast so that beneath the cover of his leather shirt he clasped the ring. "Down, you creeping thing, and out of my path! Your time is at an end. You cannot betray me or slay me now." Then suddenly, as before under the eaves of the Eamon Mule, Sam saw these two rivals with other vision. A crouching shape, scarcely more than a shadow of a living thing, a creature now wholly ruined and defeated, yet filled with a hideous lust and rage. And before it stood stern, untouchable now by pity, a figure robed in white. But at its breast it held a wheel of fire. Out of the fire there spoke a commanding voice.
"Begone and trouble me no more. If you touch me ever again, you shall be cast yourself into the fire of doom."
The crouching shape backed away, terror in its blinking eyes, and yet at the same time insatiable desire. Then the vision passed, and Sam saw Frodo standing, hand on breast, his breath coming in great gasps, and Gollum at his feet, resting on his knees with his wide-splayed hands upon the ground. "Look out!" cried Sam. "He'll spring!" He stepped forward, brandishing his sword. "Quick, master!" he gasped. "Go on! Go on! No time to lose! I'll deal with him! Go on!" Frodo looked at him, as if at one now far away. "Yes, I must go on," he said. "Farewell, Sam. This is the end at last. On Mount Doom, doom shall fall. Farewell." He turned and went on, walking slowly but erect, up the climbing path. "Now," said Sam, "at last I can deal with you." He leaped forward with a drawn blade ready for battle, but Gollum did not spring. He fell flat upon the ground and whimpered.
Don't kill us.
He wept.
Don't hurt us with nasty, cruel steel. Let us live, yes. Let us live a little longer. Lost, we're lost. And when the precious goes, we'll die, yes, die into the dust.
He clawed up at the ashes of the path with his long, fleshless fingers.
Dust,
he hissed. Sam's hand wavered. His mind was hot with wrath and the memory of evil. It would be just to slay this treacherous, murderous creature. Just, and many times deserved. And also it seemed the only safe thing to do, but deep in his heart there was something that restrained him. He could not strike this thing lying in the dust. Forlorn, ruinous, utterly wretched. He himself, though only for a little while, had borne the ring, and now dimly he guessed the agony of Gollum's shriveled mind and body, enslaved to that ring, unable to find peace or relief ever in life again. But Sam had no words to express what he felt. "Oh, curse you, you stinking thing," he said. "Go away. Be off. I don't trust you, not as far as I can kick you, but be off, or I shall hurt you, yes, with nasty, cruel steel." Gollum got up on all fours and backed away for several paces, and then he turned, and as Sam aimed to kick at him, he fled away, down the path. Sam gave no more heed to him. He suddenly remembered his master. He looked up the path, and he could not see him. As fast as he could, he trudged up the road. If he had looked back, he might have seen not far below Gollum turn again, and then, with a wild light of madness glaring in his eyes, come swiftly but warily, creeping on behind, a slinking shadow among the stones. The path climbed on. Soon it bent again, and with a last eastward course passed in a cutting along the face of the cone, and came to a dark door in the mountainside, the door of the Sammath Naur. Far away now, rising towards the south, the sun, piercing the smokes and haze, burned ominous, a dull, bleared disk of red, but all Mordor lay about the mountain, like a dead land, silent, shadow-folded, waiting for some dreadful stroke. Sam came to the gaping mouth and peered in. It was dark and hot, and a deep rumbling shook the air. "Frodo! Master!" he called. There was no answer. For a moment he stood, his heart beating with wild fears, and he plunged in. A shadow followed him. At first he could see nothing. In his great need, he drew out once more the phial of Galadriel, but it was pale and cold in his trembling hand and threw no light into that stifling dark. He was come to the heart of the realm of Sauron and the forges of his ancient might, greatest in Middle-earth. All other powers here were subdued. Fearfully, he took a few uncertain steps in the dark, and then all at once there came a flash of red that leaped upward and smote the high black roof. Then Sam saw that he was in a long cave or tunnel that bored into the mountain's smoking cone. But only a short way ahead, its floors and the walls on either side were cloven by a great fissure, out of which the red glare came, now leaping up, now dying down into darkness. And all the while, far below, there was a rumor and a trouble, as of great engines throbbing and laboring. The light sprang up again, and there on the brink of the chasm, at the very crack of doom, stood Frodo, black against the glare, tense, erect, but still as if he had been turned to stone. "Master!" cried Sam. Then Frodo stirred and spoke with a clear voice, indeed with a voice clearer and more powerful than Sam had ever heard him use, and it rose above the throb and turmoil of Mount Doom, ringing in the roof and walls.
"I have come," he said, "but I do not choose now to do what I came to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine."
And suddenly, as he set it on his finger, he vanished from Sam's sight. Sam gasped, but he had no chance to cry out, for at that moment, many things happened. Something struck Sam violently in the back. His legs were knocked from under him, and he was flung aside, striking his head against the stony floor as a dark shape sprang over him. He lay still, and for a moment, all went black. And far away, as Frodo put on the ring and claimed it for his own, even in Sammath Naur, the very heart of his realm, the power in Barad-dûr was shaken, and the tower trembled from its foundations to its proud and bitter crown. The Dark Lord was suddenly aware of him, and his eye, piercing all shadows, looked across the plain to the door that he had made, and the magnitude of his own folly was revealed to him in a blinding flash, and all the devices of his enemies were at last laid bare. Then his wrath blazed in consuming flame, and his fear rose like a vast black smoke to choke him, for he knew his deadly peril and the thread upon which his doom now hung. From all his policies and webs of fear and treachery, from all his stratagems and wars, his mind shook free, and throughout his realm a tremor ran. His slaves quailed, and his armies halted, and his captains, suddenly steerless, bereft of will, wavered and despaired, for they were forgotten. The whole mind and purpose of the power that wielded them was now bent with overwhelming force upon the mountain. At his summons, wheeling with a rending cry, in a last desperate race there flew, faster than the winds, the Nazgûl, the ring-wraiths. And with a storm of wings, they hurtled southwards to Mount Doom. Sam got up. He was dazed, and blood streaming from his head dripped in his eyes. He groped forward, and then he saw a strange and terrible thing. Gollum, on the edge of the abyss, was fighting like a mad thing with an unseen foe. To and fro he swayed, now so near to the brink that almost he tumbled in, now dragging back, falling to the ground, rising, falling again. And all the while he hissed but spoke no words. The fires below awoke in anger. The red light blazed, and all the cavern was filled with a great glare and heat. Suddenly Sam saw Gollum's long hands draw upwards to his mouth, and his white fangs gleamed and then snapped as they bit. Frodo gave a cry, and there he was, fallen upon his knees at the chasm's edge. But Gollum, dancing like a mad thing, held aloft the ring, a finger still thrust within its circle. It shone now as if verily it was wrought of living fire.
Precious! Precious! Precious!
Gollum cried.
My precious! Oh, my precious!
And with that, even as his eyes were lifted up to gloat on his prize, he stepped too far, toppled, wavered for a moment on the brink, and then with a shriek, he fell. Out of the depths came his last wail.
Precious!
And he was gone. There was a roar and a great confusion of noise. Fires leaped up and licked the roof. The throbbing grew to a great tumult, and the mountain shook. Sam ran to Frodo and picked him up and carried him out to the door. And there, upon the dark threshold of the Sammath Naur, high above the plains of Mordor, such wonder and terror came on him that he stood, still forgetting all else, and gazed as one turned to stone. A brief vision he had of swirling cloud, and in the midst of it towers and battlements, tall as hills, founded upon a mighty mountain throne above immeasurable pits, great courts and dungeons, eyeless prisons, sheer as cliffs, and gaping gates of steel and adamant. And then all passed. Towers fell and mountains slid, walls crumbled and melted, crashing down. Vast spires of smoke and spouting steams went billowing up until they toppled like an overwhelming wave, and its wild crest curled and came foaming down upon the land. And then at last, over the miles between there came a rumble, rising to a deafening crash and roar. The earth shook, the plain heaved and cracked, and Orodruin reeled. Fire belched from its riven summit. The skies burst into thunder seared with lightning. Down like lashing whips fell a torrent of black rain, and into the heart of the storm, with a cry that pierced all other sounds, tearing the clouds asunder, the Nazgûl came, shooting like flaming bolts, as caught in the fiery ruin of the hill and sky, they crackled, withered, and went out. "Well, this is the end, Sam Gamgee," said a voice by his side, and there was Frodo, pale and worn, and yet himself again, and in his eyes there was peace now. neither strain of will nor madness nor any fear. His burden was taken away. There was the dear master of the sweet days in the Shire. "Master!" cried Sam, and fell upon his knees. In all that ruin of the world, for the moment, he felt only joy, great joy. The burden was gone. His master had been saved. He was himself again. He was free. And then Sam caught sight of the maimed and bleeding hand. "Your poor hand," he said, "and I have nothing to bind it with or comfort it. I would have spared him a whole hand of mine, rather, but he's gone now, beyond recall, gone forever." "Yes," said Frodo. "But do you remember Gandalf's words? Even Gollum may have something yet to do. But for him, Sam, I could not have destroyed the ring. The quest would have been in vain, even at the bitter end. So let us forgive him, for the quest is achieved. And now all is over. I'm glad you're here with me. Here at the end of all things, Sam." Thus ends that chapter. Thus ends Gollum. Thus ends the ring. Thus ends Sauron. Thus returns the king. Happy Tolkien Reading Day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Check out my other Tolkien Reading Day videos. And I'll see you down in the comments.